Okay, sorry about that. We're back. And I have found where it broke. If I knew why it was doing it, I would have it fixed. I have tried nearly everything that I can think of. There's one or two other things I might try, but they shouldn't fix the problem. But we'll give them a whirl at some point anyway. Um, it's probably like a Microsoft update issue where I've gotten a Microsoft update and it's causing problems. I don't know. Yay. Okay. Who are you? Thomas asked. Yeah, that's where we were. Okay. So it actually didn't break too far back. I was afraid it was going to be pages. Okay. Fortunately, it was only about a paragraph. I'll take that. That's I mean it's a loss, but it's a win of a loss. Okay. He really did save us, Hallie said. I know he's a spy, but who are you? Thomas asked. This is Medtech Hallie Eckel, Peniel said. Hallie looked up at Thomas. So tall. His eyes held her. He appeared to be in some ageless ring of middle age, but when she took the hand he held out to her, it felt firm and youthful. A commanding hand, confident. She grew aware then that Waela and Kerro were touching. Kerro's arm was around Waela's shoulder, guiding her toward the hatchway. "Medtech," Thomas said. "You'll be of great help to us, Hallie Eckel. Come this way." Hallie resisted the pressure of his arm and watched Kerro reach out, inquisitive, to touch Waela's abdomen with one finger. Thomas saw the gesture and focused on Waela. "Something's wrong with her. She should not be that big." "Thomas loves her," Hallie thought. The sound of concern was plain in his voice. "My prayer box says she's only a few dirons from parturition," Hallie said. "That can't be." "But it is. Only a few dirons. Otherwise—" Hallie shrugged. "She appears to be healthy." "That's impossible, I say. It takes much longer for a baby to develop into—" "Lewis does it. You heard what the E-clones said." That was Kerro. Oh, Lewis does it. You heard what the E-clones said. That was Kerro returned from the hatchway, not concealing a faint amusement at Thomas's confusion. "Yes, but—" Thomas shook his head. "Can you climb down to the beach by yourself, Hallie?" Peniel asked. "The rear of the freighter is already breaking up, and I think Waela—" "Yes, of course." She moved past him, the familiar face and familiar voice, his body much thinner than she remembered, though. It struck her then. He's not the Kerro I knew. He's changed. So different. Behind her, she heard Thomas muttering, "I want to examine that woman myself. I want to examine that woman myself." What's most frustrating about these breaks is they'd be much easier to fix if, like, my computer wasn't hung up every time it happens. There's some network interaction going on. I don't know what it is. Um, where it's getting jammed up in some way. And if it was after a consistent amount of time or data had been transferred, it'd be another thing. It'd be like, oh, so I have to shorten these, or be aware that if I'm going to that if I'm going to keep doing them, if I go beyond a certain time period, it would do it every time. But that's not how it works, sadly. And it doesn't happen all the time. So whatever. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Les Angel. Great to see you posting. Thank you. On with the show. Man also knows not his time, as the fishes that are taken in an evil net, and as the birds that are caught in the snare, so are the sons of men snared in an evil time, when it falls suddenly upon them. Christian Book of the Dead. Ship Records.
Blow that cutter. Give me the particulars later.
Lewis switched off the comm line and turned to face Oakes across the command center. As though this act conveyed some deep communication, they both turned to look up at the big screen. The bustle of activity around them went on, some 50 people guiding the Redoubt's defenses under the eyes of the armed naturals quietly watchful at the edges of the room. But to Legata, who stood near Oakes, it seemed that the noise level went down dramatically. She, too, stared at the screen. It was early Rega morning out there, and the light showed the massed ring of hylighters, the waiting mobs of demons, at the cliffs, all strangely held in check. Something new had been added this morning, however. A naked man sat on a flat rock pinnacle to the southeast, highlighter tentacles brushing against him. Sensor amplification had showed his features in close-up. The poet, Kerro. On the floor of the plain beneath Peniel stood a plasteel cutter fitted with wheels, E-clones, and what appeared to be naturals grouped around it. The cutter's deadly nozzle was pointed toward the Redoubt, too far away for that model to do any damage, but unmistakably menacing. The most menacing thing of all was the fact that no demon moved to molest any of the people waiting beside the cutter. Pandora's terrible creatures waited with others in the mysterious docility.
We should know in a blink or two,
Lewis said. He threaded his way through the room's activities to stand near Oakes and Legata. All of them stared up at the screen.
Can't we send some people out there? Oakes asked. We could take that thing with a direct attack.
Who would we send out?
Lewis asked.
Clones. We have clones up to here.
He brushed the edge of his hand across his throat.
And we don't have enough food. They could get through if we sent enough of them.
Why would clones do that? Legata asked.
What?
Oakes glared at her audacity. Why would clones obey an order to attack? They can see the demons out there, and there'll be runners somewhere on that plane. Why would the clones take the risk?
To save themselves, of course. If they stay here and do nothing.
Oakes's voice trailed off. Your fate is their fate, she said. Maybe worse. They'll ask why you aren't out there with them.
Because I'm the CP. I'm worth more than they are to our survival.
Worth more to them than they are worth to themselves?
Legata, what are you...
Oakes was interrupted by a brilliant flash of light and a blast so close that the concussion popped his ears and took his breath away. Sensor images vanished from the big screen to be replaced by static flashes of light. Legata, thrown backward by the blast, steadied herself against a fixed control console. Lewis had sprawled on the floor, and, as he climbed to his feet, they all heard screams and clattering feet in the passage outside the command center. Oakes gestured to Legata.
Get that screen working.
We must have hit that cutter,
Lewis said. Legata leaped to the screen controls, keyed an emergency search for active sensors, found a high one which looked out over the Redoubt to the distant cliff with its bank of highlighters. Peniel still sat on the pinnacle. The plasteel cutter and its crew remained at their cliff base. Nothing appeared to have changed. They could all hear the sound of pounding against the command center's hatch. Someone across the room opened it. Immediately, the center filled with people, a menagerie of E-clones and naturals, all crying and screaming, "Runners! Runners! Seal off!" Lewis whirled to the nearest console, slapped the key for the seal off program. As hatches hissed shut, they saw on the screen the first wave of people shrieking in terror at the inner edge of the Redoubt. Legata turreted the high sensor to follow them, and they all saw the smoking break in the Redoubt's perimeter, the flood of people fleeing it and being brought up short at sealed hatches. Fists beat a muffled drumming on the hatches, the sound made all the more terrible by its distance from the sensor. It gave the whole scene a marionette quality. Lewis suddenly darted across the room, grabbed the arm of one of the newcomers, and returned to Oakes with the man. Legata recognized him as a crew supervisor, a natural named Marco.
What the hell happened out there?
Oakes demanded. I don't know. The man blinked in confusion, stared up at the screen rather than at Oakes. "We took one of the new cutters, the long-range ones, and we hit within a meter of 'em."
You missed them?
Oakes screamed it, his face red with rage. "No, no, sir, a meter's good enough. That close will melt bedrock for 10 meters all around. It's just—"
"That's all right, Marco," Lewis said. "Just describe what you saw."
"It was that man up on the rocks." Marco pointed at the screen.
He didn't do anything, Oakes said. We were looking at the screen the whole time, and he...
"Let Marco tell us what he saw,"
Lewis interrupted. "It was almost too fast for the eye to see," the supervisor said. "Our beam hit less than a meter away. I saw the ground over there begin to glow. Then the beam bent. It bent right up toward that man on the rock. I thought I saw him glow. Then the beam came right back at us."
"Our cutter's gone?" Lewis asked.
"It went up so fast only a few of us escaped."
Send out some clones,
Oakes said. An unmistakable press of bodies moved toward him as he spoke, and, too late, he realized his danger. More than half the command center crew was composed of clones, and most of the refugees who now crowded the room were clones. "Sure," someone shouted from the press of people. "You stay here while we take the risk." Another voice, gravelly and full of gutturals, took it up from another corner of the room.
Yes, send out some clones. More meat for the demons. A diversion while you naturals tiptoe home to Colony in your wine.
Oakes glanced at the ring of faces pressing toward him. Even the naturals among them appeared angry. This was not the time to tell them that Colony no longer existed. They would know their power then. They would know how much he needed them.
No!
Oakes waved a hand in the air.
All survival decisions belong to the CP. I am ship's envoy and voice here.
"Oh, it's ship now!" someone shouted.
We will not run home to Colony, Oakes said. We will stand here at your side, to the last man if necessary.
The guttural voice responded.
You're damn right you're not leaving.
The room took on an odd sense of quiet, into which Lewis's voice came clearly.
"We will not be beaten."
Oakes picked it up.
We have almost eliminated the kelp that kept us from gardening the sea. The hylighters will go next. A few rebels will not stand in the way of the good life we can make for ourselves here.
Oakes glanced at Lewis, surprised, a flitting smile there.
"Tell us what to do,"
Lewis said. One of Lewis's minions in the crowd responded on cue. "Yes, tell us."
How well early conditioning pays off,
Oakes thought. And he said,
First, we have to take stock of our situation.
"I've been watching the screen," Lewis said. "I don't see any runners. Have you seen any, Legata?"
"No, not a one."
"Not one runner has tried to enter the Redoubt," Lewis said. "They remember the chlorine."
Have you looked at the whole perimeter?
Someone demanded.
"No, but look at those people near the break in our wall," Lewis pointed. "Not a one of them's in trouble. I'm going to open the hatches."
No!
Oakes stepped forward.
Whoever asked that question is right. We have to be sure.
He turned toward Legata.
Do you have enough sensors to scan the perimeter?
"Not completely, but Jesus is right. Nothing's attacking our people out there."
Send some
volunteers out with portable sensors, then," Lewis said. "We could use a few repair crews as well. I'll go with 'em if you like."
Oakes stared at Lewis. Could the man really be that brave? Runners remembering chlorine? Impossible. Something else was holding the demons in check. As he thought this, Oakes experienced the abrupt sensation that the entire planet was out there, waiting just for the proper moment to attack and kill him. Taking his silence for agreement, Lewis pressed his way through the crowd, selecting people as he moved.
You. Come with me. Larius, you get a repair crew together. Take the down chart and get busy restoring our eyes and ears.
Lewis popped a hatch at the far side of the room, waved his volunteers through, and turned before joining them.
All right, Morgan, it's up to you.
What did he mean by that?
Oakes watched the hatch seal behind Lewis.
I have to do something. Everybody, back to work, Oakes said. Everybody but the command center crew outside in the passage.
They were reluctant to move.
Nothing came in the hatch when Jesus opened it, Oakes said. Go on, we have work to do. So do you.
Leave the hatch open if you want, Legata said. Oakes did not like that, but the suggestion moved them. People began leaving. Legata turned back to the control console for the big screen. Oakes moved to the side, becoming intensely aware of the musky smell which surrounded her.
We're fighting the whole damned planet, he muttered.
He watched while portable sensors and repairs began restoring the big screen's overview of the Redoubt's operation. As service returned, it became apparent that something had destroyed some 70 degrees, that's 70 degrees of perimeter sensors below the 10-meter level. Burned out relays had put other sensors out of service. The damage was far less than he had feared. He began to breathe more easily, realizing only then how tension had tightened his chest. Lewis returned after a time, crossed to Oakes and Legata at the screen.
Do you want those people to stay in the passage?
Oakes shook his head.
No.
He continued to watch the screen.
I sent them about their business, Lewis said. Nothing seems to have changed outside. Why are they waiting?
War of nerves,
Oakes said.
Perhaps.
We must devise a plan of attack, Oakes said. The clones must be convinced that it's necessary to attack.
Lewis stared at the play of Legata's hands across the screen controls, glancing up now and then at the COA she produced. Rega was much higher in the sky now, and Alki was beginning to creep above the horizon. It was brilliant out on the plain, every detail washed in light.
How will you convince the clones? Lewis asked.
Get a few of them in here,
Oakes said. Lewis directed a questioning stare at Oakes, but turned and obeyed. He returned with 12 E-clones whose appearance had been held closer to the natural standard except for the introduction of extra musculature in arms and legs. They were a type Oakes had always thought bulged in a repellent way, but he masked his dislike. Lewis stopped the group in an arc about 3 paces from Oakes. Studying the faces, Oakes recognized some of the group which had fled into the command center earlier. There was no avoiding the distrust in their expressions. And Oakes noted that Lewis had seen fit to don a holstered lasgun, and that the naturals around the edges of the room were alert and watchful.
I will not go back to Colony, Oakes began. Never. We are here to...
You might just run back to ship.
It was a clone standing just to the left of Lewis.
Ship will not respond to us, Legata said. We are on our own.
Damn her!
Oakes went pale. Didn't she know how dangerous it was to betray your dependence on others?
We are being tested, that's all,
Oakes said. He glanced at Lewis, surprised another fleeting grin on the man's face. Maybe we're supposed to go outside and run for it, Legata said. Her fingers danced across the screen's controls. Maybe it's just a game like the Scream Room or running the P.
What is she doing?
Oakes wondered. He shot a glance at her, but Legata continued to direct the screen's controls. They're doing something, she said. Every eye turned toward the screen whose entire area she had focused on the view toward the cliffs. Peniel was standing now, his right hand clutching a highlighter tentacle. More E-clones and others had massed around the cutter on the plain below him. Demons had moved out from the cliff shadows. Even the enclosing arc of highlighters appeared more agitated, moving about, changing altitude. Legata zoomed in on a man standing beside the cutter's left wheel. Thomas, she said, but the highlighters...
He's in league with them, Lewis said. Has been all along.
Legata stared out at the plane. Was that possible? She had been about to expose Oaks as a clone, but now she hesitated. What did she really know about Thomas? As she thought this, Thomas lowered his right arm, and Peniel, atop the pinnacle, was picked up by one of the giant bags, carried gently down to the plane. Thomas and his people were moving forward now, a ragged advance, but spreading out on both sides of the cutter.
There must be at least 1,000 of them, Lewis muttered. Where'd they get that many people?
What are the demons doing? Legata asked. The creatures had spread out below the cliff. Dashers, spinnerets, flatwings, and more, even a few of the rare grunchers. They were following the attackers, but slowly and at a distance.
If they get that cutter within range of us, we're through, Oaks said.
He rounded on Lewis.
Now will you send out some attackers?
We have no choice, Lewis said.
He glanced at the clones beside him.
You all see that, don't you?
All of them were staring up at the screen, intently focused on the advancing cutter and the outrider demons.
It's plain to see, Lewis said. They cut open our perimeter and let the demons in. We're all dead then. But if we can stop them...
Everybody, Oaks called out. I grant full status as a natural to every clone who volunteers. These rebels are the last real threat to our survival. When they're gone, we'll make a paradise out of this planet.
Slowly, but with growing momentum, the arc of clones moved toward the passage hatch. More joined them as they moved.
Keep them moving, Lewis, Oaks said. Issue weapons as they go out. We'll win by the weight of numbers alone.
Once my fancy was soothed with dreams of virtue, of fame and enjoyment. Once I falsely hoped to meet with beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of unfolding.
Frankenstein's monster speaks. Ship records. As Thomas gave the signal for the attack, he experienced the almost paralyzing sensation that he was not aiming a blow at the Redoubt, but was striking out at Ship.
You set this up, Ship. See what you've done.
Ship gave no response. Thomas moved forward with his army. The air was hot on the plain below the cliffs, both suns climbing to their meridians. The light was brilliant, forcing him to squint when he looked toward the reflected glare of the suns. He smelled a flinty bitterness in the air, dust kicked up by his ragtag group. He looked left and right at them. Had anyone ever dreamed of such a wild mixture on such a venture? The naturals in Avata's collection were a vanishing minority, swallowed up in the press of strange shapes. Bulbous heads, oddly placed eyes, ears, noses, and mouths, great barrel chests and scrawny ones, thin limbs and conventional fingers, ropey tendrils, feet, and stumps. They strode and rocked and stumbled along in obedience to his command. The improvised wheels they had attached to the plasteel cutter grated in sand, bumped over small rocks. Muttering, grunting, wheezing, his people moved forward. Some of the E-clones chanted, "Avata! Avata! Avata!" as they shuffled along. He noted that the demons moved with him at a distance, just as Peniel had said they would. Waiting to scavenge. What did the demons see here? Peniel had said that he and the hylighters could project false images to hold the demons in check. Certain of the E-clones, too, exhibited this skill. Thomas guessed it to be a side effect of the recombinant experiments with the kelp. It seemed a fragile defense against such potent creatures. This whole venture was based on fragility. Not enough weapons, not enough people, not enough time to plan and train. He glanced back toward the cliffs. He glanced back toward the cliffs, saw the arc of trailing demons, Peniel walking among them without fear. A gigantic dasher brushed against the poet, veered away. Thomas shuddered. Peniel had said he would not take active part in killing, but would protect this army as well as he could. The medtech and a hand-picked crew of aides waited at the foot of the cliff. Everything now depended on whether this force could so overawe the Redoubt's defenders that Oakes would capitulate. At the chosen moment, Thomas gave the signal for his people to spread out, dispersing wide across the plain. If Peniel's powers continued to work, the defenders would see only one small, tightly massed target of attackers coming straight on into the range of the Redoubt's weapons. Thomas joined the crew of the cutter as they veered off to the left. As he moved, doubts welled up in him. By his time reckoning, they had only hours until Ship carried out the threat to end humankind forever. This venture seemed hopeless. He would have to overcome the Redoubt, assemble the survivors, find the proper warship, and prove to Ship that humankind should endure. Not enough time. Peniel. It was Peniel's fault that they had been delayed so long. To every argument for the need to attack the Redoubt, Peniel had interjected a quiet remonstrance. The nest was paradise enough, he said. No doubt it was a paradise, a continuous growing season for earth plants. No rot, no mold, no insect parasites, not even any demons. Not even any demons to threaten the people there. The crater nest was a blastula of earth, with a capital E, a chaotic jumble of elements looking for growth and order.
A 1-kilometer circle of Eden does not a habitable planet make.
And always Peniel there with his senseless observations. What you do with the dirt beneath your feet, that is a prayer.
Is that what you want, Ship? That kind of prayer?
No answer from Ship, just the rustle of sand underfoot, the movement of his army as it spread out wide across the plain and continued to advance on the Redoubt.
I'm on my own here. No help from Ship.
He remembered the void ship Earthling then, the ship which had become Ship. He remembered the crew, their long training on Moonbase. Where were they now? Any of them left in Hybe? He longed to see Bickle again. John Bickle would be a good one to have here now, resourceful, direct. Where was Bickle now? Sand grated under his feet like the sands of the exercise yard at Moonbase. Sands of the moon, not of Earth. All those years, looking up to the earth at night, the blue and white glory of it. His desires had not been for the stars, not for some mathematical conception at Tau Ceti. He had wanted only the earth, that one place forbidden to him in all of the universe.
Pandora is not Earth.
But the nest was a temptation, so like the earth of his dreams.
Probably not like the real Earth at all. What do I know of the real Earth?
His kind had known only the clone sections of Moonbase, forever separated from the human originals by the vitro shields. Always the vitro shields. Always only a simulated Earth, just as the clones simulated humans.
They didn't want us taking strange diseases all over the universe.
A laugh escaped him.
Look at the disease we've brought to Pandora. War. And the disease called humankind.
A shout came from off to his right, bringing him out of his reverie. He saw that a beam from the Redoubt had incinerated a large rock ahead of them on the plain. Thomas signaled for wider separation. He looked back, saw Peniel with his spreading pack of demons still walking imperturbably behind the army. A terrible resentment of Peniel welled up in Thomas then. Peniel was a naturally born human.
I was grown in an axolotl tank.
How odd, he thought, that it should take all of these uncountable eons and an ultimate crisis here for him to realize how much he resented being a clone.
Clones from Moonbase are expressly forbidden.
The list of thou shalt nots had stretched on for page after page.
It is forbidden to come into contact with natal humans or with Earth.
Banished from the garden without benefit of sin. What is felt by one is felt by all, Avata said.
Yes, Avata, but Pandora is not Earth.
Ship had said he was original material, though, some bit of what Earth had been. What memories of Earth tingled in the genes, sparkling at the tips of his fingers? It was very hot out here on the plain, glaring hot, exposed. Could Peniel's projection truly confuse the Redoubt's defenders? Peniel had confused the probes, that was a fact. And Thomas recalled his own mental linkage with Bitten, the control program for the freighter which had brought such a cornucopia of supplies. As Peniel said, the ability to communicate was also the ability to dissemble. What if Peniel just left them out here, dropped the masking projection? What if Peniel were wounded? Or killed? Peniel should have stayed back by the cliffs.
That's just like a clone, missing the obvious.
The old taunt rang through his ears.
Just like a clone.
All the human efforts at instilling pride in the clones had vanished before the taunts. Clones were supposed to be extra human, built for precision performance. Humans did not like that. Clones of Moonbase did not look different from humans, did not talk different, but separation developed eccentricities.
Just like a clone.
He imagined a Moonbase instructor looking at him out of that blasphemous screen, lecturing on the intricacies of systems monitors, reprimanding, "That's just like a clone walking out on Paradise." His army was almost into range of the Redoubt's smallest weapons now, less than 200 meters away. Thomas shook himself out of his reverie.
Hell of a way for a general to behave.
He looked left and right. They were well fanned out. He paused beside a tall black rock, taller than he. The Redoubt loomed ahead, prickly with the muzzles of its cutters. Peniel could not come any closer. Thomas turned and waved for Peniel to stop. Saw the poet obey. The army would have to go on alone from here. They could not risk their most valuable weapon. The rock beside him began to glow. Thomas leaped to the right as the rock erupted in molten orange. A tiny splash of it burned his left arm. He ignored it, shouted, "Attack!" His mob started a shambling run toward the Redoubt. As they moved, exterior hatches in the Redoubt's perimeter snapped open. Defenders swarmed onto the plain carrying burners and las guns. They raced forward in a confused mass toward Peniel's projected images. As they came within a few meters, their confusion increased. Targets dissolved before them. They stumbled left and right, shooting. Random shots dropped some of the army. The Redoubt's cutters began to sparkle with incandescent beams, which probed the plain. "Fire!" Thomas screamed. "Fire!" Some of his people obeyed, but the Redoubt's defenders presented the same genetic mix as the army's. Attackers and defenders, indistinguishable without uniforms, stumbled into each other. Searing beams wavered in wild arcs, cutting friend and foe alike. Bloody bodies lay on the plain, some dismembered, some screaming. Thomas stared in horror at the arterial geyser from a headless torso directly to his left. Red spray splashed all around as the body tumbled forward.
What have I done? What have I done?
None of these people, attackers or defenders, knew how to fight a proper war. They were hysterical instruments of destruction, nothing more. Fewer than a fourth of the defenders had reached his army. What did it matter? The plain around the Redoubt was a bloody shambles. He signaled to the cutter crew on his left. "Cut through their wall!" But his crew had been decimated, the cutter's improvised wheels disabled. It stood canted over to its right, the deadly muzzle pointed at the ground. The survivors crouched behind the cutter. Thomas whirled and looked back at Peniel. The poet stood immobile amidst the waiting pack of demons. Two dashers crouched on his right like obedient dogs. The horrible line of Pandora's killer species reached left and right in a wide arc around the scene of carnage. Rage coursed through Thomas.
"You haven't beaten me, ship!"
He stumbled, panting across to the cutter. grasped its heavy barrel and heaved it around. 4 strong clones had been needed to lift the thing back at the cliff. In his rage, he moved it by himself, tipping it against a rock until it was trained on a blank stretch of redoubt wall. The surviving crew members cowered away from him as he leaped to the controls and activated the beam. A blinding blue line leaped out to the redoubt, melting the wall. Upper structure sloughed away, slipping down into the molten pool. Reason returned to Thomas. He stepped back, again. He was 20 paces from the humming cutter when the defense weapons found it. The cutter exploded as beam confronted beam. Thomas did not even feel the sharp chunk of metal which penetrated his chest. Why shouldst thou cause a man to put himself to shame by begging aid, when it is in thy power, O Lord, to vouchsafe him his necessities in an honorable fashion? E Kahan, Atereth ha-Zadikim, Ship Records. I mangled the pronunciation of that, I'm sure, but we'll carry on as though I didn't. Halley kept a careful watch on Waela as the E-clone assistants prepared an obstetrics area within their temporary medical shelter. The cliff shadow covered them, and the confusion of the army departing filled the air with discordant noise. Shouts, grunts, the crunching of the cutter's wheels on the sand. She felt a sense of relief as the demons moved off with Peniel. He frightened her now. Her soft-voiced poet friend had become the keeper of a terrifying inner fire. He was the keeper of the kind of terrible power she had seen at Golgotha. Heavy as she was with the unborn child, Waela moved with a supple quickness. She was in her natural habitat, Pandora. This place had changed Waela, too. Was that why Peniel had mated with her? Halley put down an anguished stab of jealousy. I am a medtech. I am Natali. An unborn child needs me. I want joy. She tried not to think about what might happen. She tried not to think about what might happen out there on the plain. Thomas had warned her what to expect. Where had he learned about battle? She had been unable to suppress feelings of outrage. Those people who will die, how are they different from us? She had hurled the question at him as they moved down from the cliff top. Steadied by highlighter tendrils, the red streaks of dayside fingering a gray horizon on their right. It had been a nightmare setting, the babble of the army, the muted flutings of the highlighters. The great orange bags had floated some people down to the plain, carried equipment, guarded the descent of those who stayed afoot. Hundreds of people, tons of equipment. Thomas had not answered her question until she repeated it. We have to take over the Redoubt. Ship will destroy us if we don't. That makes us no better than them. But we will survive. Survive as what? Does Ship say anything about that? Ship says, When you shall hear of wars and the rumours of wars, be you not troubled, for such things must needs be, but the end shall not be yet. That's not Ship, that's the Christian Book of the Dead. But Ship quotes it. Thomas had looked at her then, and she had seen the pain within his eyes. Christian Book of the Dead. Ship had shown parts of it to her on request, displaying the words within the tiny cubby where Peniel once had studied. If Thomas really were a CP, he would know those words. She wondered if Oakes knew them. How strange that no one shipside had responded to her careful questions and probes about the events on the Hill of Skulls. Thomas had frightened her then as they paused to regain their breath on a little rock platform deep in a fissure. Why did Ship show you the crucifixion? Have you ever asked yourself that, Halley Echo? How do you know about
Ship tells me things.
Did Ship tell you why I...
No.
Thomas set off down the steep trail. She called after him, Do you know why Ship showed me that? He stopped at a gap in the fissure, looked out at the morning light growing on the plain, the glistening brilliance of reflections off the Redoubt's plaz in the distance. She caught up with him. Do you know? Thomas rounded on her, the pain terrible in his eyes.
If I knew that, I'd know how to warship. Did Ship give you no clues?
Only that we must learn about holy violence.
He glared at her. Tell me what you saw there at the crucifixion.
I saw a man tortured and killed. It was brutal and awful, but Ship would not let me interfere.
Holy violence,
Thomas muttered. The man they killed, he spoke to me. I thought he recognized me. He knew I had come far to see him there. He said I was not hidden from him. He said I should let them know it was done.
He said what?
He said if anyone understood God's will, then I must understand it. But I don't. She shook her head, tears close. I'm just a medtech, a Natali, and I don't know why Ship showed me that. Thomas spoke in a whisper.
That's all the man said?
No, he told the people in the crowd not to weep for him, not to weep for him, but for their children. And he said something about a green tree.
If they do these things in a green tree, what will they do in a dry?
Thomas intoned. That's it. That's what he said. What did he mean?
He meant that the powerful grow more deadly in times of adversity, and what they do in the roots can be felt to the ends of the branches. Forever.
Then why have you created this army? Why are you going out there to...
Because I must.
Thomas resumed his way down the trail, refusing to respond to her. Others who had chosen to climb down caught up, pressed close. She had no other opportunity to speak to him, sorry. They were at the foot of the cliffs soon, and she had her own duties while Thomas set off about his war. Ferry was one of the people Thomas assigned to medical work. She knew what Thomas and Kerro thought about the old man, and this prompted her now to kindness toward him. While she worked with Ferry in the rude fabric shelter below the cliffs, she heard Thomas speaking to his army.
Blessed by Ship, my strength, which teaches my hands to war and my fingers to fight.
Was that any way for a CP to talk? She asked this of Ferry while they worked.
That's the way Oakes talks.
The old man seemed resigned to his fate, but eager to help her. The army was busy at its preparations then, Peniel standing nearby like a cold observer. She did not like the nearness of the demons, but he said that they would not harm the people here. He said the hylighters had filled the demons' senses with a false world which kept them in check. Ferry shambled past her then, glancing oddly at her nose ring. She wondered how Ferry felt about the way Thomas talked. Thomas spoke about the old man in front of him as though Ferry were not there.
This old fool doesn't have any real power, Thomas had said. Oakes thinks he has a corner on the Oakes thinks he has a corner on the real I'm having a hard time. Oakes thinks he has a corner on the real power and the symbolic power right here on Black Dragon. He doesn't share power. He's set himself up here for easy pickings compared to what we'd have encountered at Colony.
I told him he was moving too soon, Ferry had said. Thomas had ignored him, addressed Peniel.
Ferry's a liar, but we can use him. He must know something valuable about Oak's plans.
But I don't know anything, the old man's voice quavered. One of the naturals Thomas had named as an aide had come up then with organizational problems. Thomas had stared at the hash marks over the man's right eye. They had gone away together, Thomas muttering,
Hell of a way to slap together an army out of somebody else's rejects.
She had seen some sense in his orders, though, the E-clones grouped according to design, runners, carriers, lifters. He had taken a training inventory, equipment operator, light physics technician, welder, unskilled labor. She thought about this as she prepared the medical facilities under the cliff. What difference did it make to her how Thomas organized his force? When they arrived here, they would merely be wounded. Waela, helping with the preparations for the delivery, stopped in front of Hallie. Why do you look so worried? Is it something about my baby? No, nothing like that. And Waela heard her old inner voice, honesty, marking time. The baby will be born soon. Soon. Waela stared at Hallie. What has you so worried? Hallie looked out. Hallie looked at Waela's mounded abdomen. If the highlighters hadn't brought us that supply of burst from the colony didn't need it anymore. They're all dead. That's not what I. You're afraid my baby would have been robbing you of your years, your life, and I don't think your baby would take from me. Then what is it? Waela, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Trying to survive. You sound like Thomas. Thomas makes a great deal of sense sometimes. 3 E-clones intruded, staggering into the shelter, 2 of them helping a third who had lost an arm. All of them had been burned. One held the severed arm against the stump, bloody sand all around the wound.
Who's the medtech here?
One of them demanded. He was a dwarf with long, flexible fingers. Ferry started to step forward, but Hallie motioned him back. Stay with Waela. Let me know when she needs me.
I'm a doctor, you know.
There was hurt in the old voice. I know. Stay with Waela. Hallie led the injured trio to the emergency alcove partly sheltered by the black rocks of the cliff. She worked quickly, closing up the severed stump with the cell tape after powdering it with septalc.
Can't you save his arm?
The dwarf demanded. No. What's happening out there? The dwarf spat on the floor.
Hell and damn folly!
She finished with his companions, looked at the dwarf. His comment surprised her, and he saw it.
Oh, we can think well enough, he said.
Come here and let me tend to you, she said. His right arm was badly burned. She spoke to distract him from his pain. How did you come to be with the highlighters?
Lewis pushed us out, like garbage. You know what that means. There were runners. Most of us didn't get away. I hope the runners get in there.
He gestured with his good arm at the redoubt across the plain.
Eat every one of those ship-tit bastards.
The dwarf slid off the treatment table as she finished. He headed toward the exit. Where are you going?
Back to help where I can.
He stood with the fabric flap held back, and she stared out the opening at the redoubt. Blue flashes filled the air there. She could hear distant shouts and screams. You're in no condition to...
I'm well enough to carry the wounded.
There are more?
Lots of them.
He lurched out the opening, the fabric falling closed behind him. Hallie closed her eyes. In her mind she could see a mill of people. It changed to a crowd, and the crowd became a mob. Foul breath and the salty stink of blood were on the wind. The tiny lips of cuts and the great smears of burn wounds filled her imagination. A pair of broken knees blurred through her memory. The men on the crosses. That's not the way, she muttered. She took up her pry box and an emergency medical kit, stepped to the opening, flung it back. The dwarf already was a small figure in the distance. She strode after him.
Where are you going?
It was Ferry's voice calling after her. She did not turn. They need me out there.
But what about Waela?
You're a doctor. You're a doctor! She shouted it without taking her gaze off the smoke, billowing in the distance.
When humans act as spokesmen for the gods, mortality becomes more important than morality. Martyrdom corrects the discrepancy, but only for a brief interval. The sorry thing about martyrs is that they are not around to explain what it all meant, nor do they stay to see the terrible consequences of martyrdom.
You are spokesman for martyrs. Raja Thomas, Ship Records. Legata switched the big screen from sensor to sensor, trying to make sense of what the instruments reported. Images blurred, reformed in different perspective. Cutter beams slashed across the plain. She could see bodies, odd movements. Alarm buzzers signaled damage to a section of the Redoubt's perimeter. She heard Lewis dispatch repair and defense teams. Defense cutters beamed into action, directed by key people in the center. She kept her attention on the mystery in the screens. In the split-screen images, an occasional blur slipped past, as though some outside force were confusing the instruments. She wiped a sleeve across her forehead. The two suns had climbed high while the confused battle went on, and the Redoubt's life support had been reduced to minimum, shunting energy to weapons. It was hot in the command center, and the nervous movements of Oakes at her elbow irritated her. In contrast, Lewis appeared unaccountably calm, even secretly amused. It was carnage on the plane, no doubt of that. The clones in the command center affected extreme diligence at their duties, obviously fearful that they might be sent outside into the battle. Legata hit replay. Something blurred across the big screen.
What was that?
Oakes demanded. Legata hit fix, but the sensors failed to resolve an image. Once more, she hit replay and zoomed in close to the blur. Nothing sensible. She touched replay again and slowed the projection, asking the Redoubt's computer system for image enhancement. A slow shape writhed across the screen, vaguely humanoid. It moved between two rocks, struggled with some heavy object, then moved away. A harsh blue beam snaked from somewhere within the blurred area. Alarm signals were indicated by flashing blinkers at the corners of the screen. She ignored them. That was past, and Lewis had met the emergency. Something more important was indicated on the screen. A slow blossom of red-orange which had not revealed itself there before.
What are you doing? Oakes demanded. What caused that?
I think they're influencing our sensor system, she said, and she heard the disbelief in her own voice. Oakes stared at the screen for several blinks, then,
The ship! The damned ship's interfering!
Sweat droplets glistened on his upper lip and jowls. She could smell him beginning to crack.
Why would the ship do that? Why would the ship do that? Lewis asked.
Because of Thomas. You saw him out there?
Oakes's voice was breaking. Legata switched sensors, keyed for the broad view of the cliffside staging area where the attack had originated. The demons were gone, not visible anymore. The poet no longer sat his perch atop the pinnacle. The arc of watching hylighters had diminished to a thin rim atop the cliffs. The whole scene stood out in the glare of double sunlight. "Where are the hylighters?" she asked. "I didn't see them go."
None in close, Lewis said. Maybe they've gone off somewhere to...
He broke off at a commotion near the open passage hatch. Legata turned to see a dark-haired natural, a crew supervisor, slip into the command center. Sweaty and nervous, he hurried across to Lewis. There was cell tape covering a gory burn on the man's left bare shoulder, and his eyes showed the glazing of a painkiller. So there are naturals outside, too, she thought. "We're getting a lot of wounded clones, Jesus," the man said. His voice was hoarse, tense. "What do we do with them?" Lewis looked at Oakes, fielding the question.
Set up an infirmary, Oakes said. Clones' quarters. Let 'em treat their own.
Not many of them understand medical care, Lewis said. Some are pretty young, remember.
I know,
Oakes said. Lewis nodded.
I see.
He glanced at the crew supervisor.
You heard it. Get busy.
The man glared at Oakes, then at Lewis, but obeyed.
The ship's interfering with us, Oakes said. We can't spare medical people for any others right now. We have to devise a plan for...
What is going on out there? Legata asked. Oakes turned, saw that once more she was running through the sensors, showing several at once. She glanced up at the screen and, at first, did not see what had attracted her attention. Then he saw it. A rectangle high up on the right showed a silvery something creeping over the Redoubt's walls. It moved like a slow-motion wave, blanking out sensors, creeping up and up. Legata compensated for the obscured sensors, moving back and back through new sensors. The wave was composed of countless glittering threads bright in the glare of the double suns.
Spinnerets,
Lewis hissed. The entire room became so quiet that the air was brittle with listening. Legata continued, busy at the console. Lewis turned to the naturals guarding the command center.
Harcourt, you and Javo take a burner and see what you can do to cut through that spinneret mesh.
The men did not respond. Legata smiled to herself at the continued quiet in the room. She could feel the tensions building to the precise moment she desired. It had been right to wait. The men did not respond. Legata smiled to herself at the continued quiet in the room. She could feel the tensions building to the precise moment she desired. It had been right to wait. It repeated itself. Oh no. No, I did not misread that. It repeated the same sentence and a half. 2 sentences? Maybe it's intentional. I don't know. I'm going to assume the best. There was a heavy stirring in the room. She glanced back, saw more clones pressing into the center from the passage. Some of them were the more outre E-types. Most appeared to be wounded. They obviously were looking for someone. A guttural voice called out from amidst the newcomers, "We need medics!" Lewis faced the 2 naturals he had ordered to meet the spinneret attack.
You refuse to obey my orders.
Harcourt, his face red, repeated his protest.
Send some clones. That's what they're for.
From somewhere in the center of the room, a thin voice shouted,
We're not going out there.
Why should they go? Legata asked.
You stay out of this, Legata!
Oakes screamed. Just tell them why the clones should go, she said.
You know why.
No, I don't.
Because the first out on any dangerous mission are clones. Harcourt's right. Clones first. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way it will be.
So he's pitching for the loyalty of the naturals. Legata looked at Lewis, met his gaze head on. Was that amusement in his eyes? No matter. She depressed a key on the console controlling the big screen, watched the people in the room. They could not miss what was happening on the screen. She had set the program to fill it. Yes, the room was becoming a tableau, all attention shifting to the screen, locking on it. Puzzled, Oakes turned to look at the screen, saw his own likeness there. Below the image, a biographical printout was rolling. He stared at the heading. Morgan Lon Oakes, Ref Original File, Morgan Hempstead, Cell Donor. Oakes found it difficult to breathe. It was a trick. He glanced at Legata, and the cold stare he met there iced his backbone. Morgan, how sweet her voice sounded. I found your records, Morgan. See ship's imprimatur on the printout. Ship vouches for the truth of this record. A tick twitched the corner of Oak's left eyelid. He tried to swallow.
This is not happening.
Muttering drifted through the room. Oak's a clone? Ship's eyes! Legata stepped away from the console, moved to within a meter of Oakes. Your name. That's the name of the woman who bore you. For a fee. Oakes found his voice.
This is a lie. My parents, our son went Nova.
Ship says not so. She waved at the screen. See? The data continued to roll. Date of cell implantation, address of pseudo-parents, names. Lewis came up to stand at Oak's shoulder.
Why, Legata? Why, Legata?
There was no denying the amusement in his voice. She refused to take her attention from the stricken look on Oak's face. Why do I want to comfort him? The screen room was a mistake, she whispered. Someone off toward the edge of the room shouted, Clones first! Send the clone out! It began as a chant, grew to a pounding rage. Send the clone out! Oakes screamed, No! But hands grabbed him, and Legata was powerless to prevent it in the crush of people without using her great strength to kill. She found herself unable to do this. Oak's voice, screaming, "No! Please, no!" grew fainter across the room, out into the passage, was lost in the shouting of the mob. Lewis moved to the console, shut off the data, keyed a high sensor still free of the spinneret webs. It showed the sudden gush of a burner opening a gap through the web where the wall had been breached by a cutter beam from outside. Presently, Oakes stumbled into view outside, running alone across Pandora's deadly plain.
This fetus cannot be brought to term. It cannot be a fruit of the human tree. No human could accelerate its own fetal development. No human could tap the exterior world for its needed energy. No human could communicate before departing the womb. We must abort it or kill both mother and child.
Cy Murdoch, The Lewis Exchange, Ship Records. Waela sat on the edge of the cot in the obstetrics alcove they had improvised. She could hear Ferry working with the wounded out in the emergency area. He had not even noticed her leave his side. Supply crates screened her area, and she sat in the fabric-diffused shadows, taking shallow breaths to slow the contractions. The prediction of Hallie's pry box and her own inner voice had been correct. The baby was going to be born on its own schedule, and despite anything else that might be happening. Waela leaned back on the cot. "I'm not afraid. Why am I not afraid?" She felt that a voice spoke to her from her womb. "It will be as it will be." The quiet was broken by a babble of voices and another rush of footsteps into the medical shelter. How many batches of the wounded did that make? She had lost count. A particularly hard contraction forced a gasp from her. "It's time. It's really time." She felt that she had been put on a long slide, unable to get off, unable to change a single thing that would happen. This was inevitable, growing from that moment in the sub's gondola. How could I have stopped that? There was no other way.
"Where's that Taolini woman? We need her help out here."
It was Ferry's familiar wheeze. Waela thrust herself upright, staggered to her feet, and made her way heavily back to the emergency area of the shelter. She paused in the entrance as another contraction gripped her. "I'm here. What do you want?" Ferry glanced up from applying cell tape to a wounded E-clone.
"Somebody has to go outside and decide which people are most in need of emergency treatment. I don't have time."
She stumbled toward the exit.
"Wait."
The bleary old eyes focused on her.
"What's wrong with you?"
I'm... She clutched the edge of the treatment table, looked down at a wounded E-clone.
"You'd better go back and lie down,"
Ferry said. "But you need..."
"I'll decide what has to be done."
"But you said..."
"I changed my mind."
He finished with the E-clone on the table, looked down at the bulging eyes which protruded from the corners of the clone's temples.
You're well enough to go outside and see that I get the worst cases first."
She shook her head. "He doesn't know anything about..."
"He knows when somebody's dying, don't you?"
Ferry helped the clone off the table, and Waela saw the burn splash across the man's right shoulder. "He's wounded," Waela protested. "He can't..."
"We're all wounded," Ferry said.
She heard hysteria in his voice.
"Everybody's wounded. You go back now and lie down. Let the wounded take care of the wounded."
"What will you..."
"I'll be back when I've finished with this lot. Then..."
He leered at her, old yellow teeth.
"Maybe a baby. You see? I'm a poet, too. Maybe you'll like me now."
Waela felt the old snake of fear wriggle up her spine. Another burn victim staggered into the emergency area, a spidery young female with elongated neck and head, gigantic eyes. Ferry helped her onto the emergency table, signaled a clone from secondary treatment to come in and help. A stump-legged figure clumped in, held the wounded woman's shoulders. Waela turned away, unable to look at the pain in the woman's eyes. How silent she was.
I'll be in soon,
Ferry called as Waela left. She stopped at the fabric closure to the rear of the shelter. I can tend to myself. Hallie taught me to. Ferry laughed.
Hallie, sweet bloom of youth, taught you nothing. You're not a young woman, Taolini, and this is your first baby. Like it or not, you'll need me. You'll see.
Another contraction seized her as she stumbled into her alcove. She doubled over until it passed, then made her way through the gloom to the cot, threw herself on it. Another long, hard cramp rippled the length of her abdomen, followed immediately by an even harder one. She inhaled a deep breath, then a third constriction began. Suddenly, the cot was drenched with amniotic fluid. Oh, ship! The baby's coming now! She's coming! Waela clenched her eyes tightly closed, her entire body taken up in the elemental force moving within her. She had no memory of calling out, but when she opened her eyes, Ferry was there with the long-fingered dwarf she had seen in the outer area of the medical shelter. The dwarf bent over her face.
I'm Milo Kurtz.
His eyes were overlarge and protruding.
What do you want me to do?
Ferry stood behind the dwarf, wringing his hands. Perspiration stood out on his forehead, and all the hysterical bravado she had seen in the emergency area was gone.
The baby's not coming now, he said.
It's coming, she gasped.
But the medtech's not back. The Natali.
You said you could help me.
But I've never.
Another contraction rippled through her. Don't just stand there! Help me! Damn you, help me! Kurtz stroked her forehead. Twice, Ferry reached toward her, and twice pulled back. Please! Waela screamed it between gasps. The baby must be turned! Please turn her!
I can't!
Ferry backed away from the cot. Waela glanced up at the dwarf. Kurtz! Please, the baby has to be turned. Could you? Another gasping contraction silenced her. When it passed, she heard the dwarf's voice, low and calm.
Tell me what to do, sister.
Try to slip your hands around the baby and turn her. She has one arm up and it's keeping her head from. Go! Waela tasted blood where she had bitten her own lip, but the pain cleared her head. She opened her eyes, saw the dwarf kneeling between her legs, felt his hands, gentle, sure. Ah, he said.
What? What?
It was Ferry, standing at the exit from the alcove, ready to flee.
The baby tells me what to do,
Kurtz said. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed.
This infant has a name, he said. She is called Vata.
Out! Out! Waela heard the voice in her head. She saw darkness, smelled blood, felt her nose stuffed with...
Am I being born here?
Kurtz asked. He leaned back in a rapturous movement, held up a glistening infant wriggling in his hands.
How did you do that?
Ferry demanded. Waela threw her arms wide, felt the baby delivered to her breast. She felt the dwarf touching her, touching the infant. Vata, Vata, Vata. Visions of her own life mingled with scenes which she knew had occurred to Kurtz. What a sweet and gentle man! She saw the battle at the Redoubt, felt Kurtz being wounded. Other scenes unreeled before her closed eyes like a speeded hollow. She felt Peniel's presence. She heard Peniel's voice in her head. Terrifying. She could not shut it out. The touch of the infant teaches birth, and our hands are witness to the lesson. That was Peniel, but he was not here in the medical shelter. She sensed the people they had left aboard ship then, the hydroponics workers, the crew going about their business along the myriad passages, even the dormant ones in Hybe. All were one with her mind for an instant. She felt them pause in their shared awareness. She felt the questions in their minds. Their terror became her terror. "What is happening to me? Please, what is happening?" "We live! We live!" All the other people vanished from her awareness as she heard/felt those words. Only the speaker of those words remained with her. A tiny voice, a chant, an enormous relief. "We live!" Waela opened her eyes, looked up into the eyes of the dwarf. "I have seen everything," he whispered. "The infant." "Yes," she whispered. "Vata, our Vata."
Something's happening, Fairy said. What is it?
He put his hands to his temples.
Get out of there! Get out, I say!
He collapsed, writhing. Waela looked up at Kurtz. "Help him." Kurtz stood up.
Yes, of course. The worst of the wounded first.
Because, as you'll recall, he was put through the scream room. Scream! And it damaged him pretty badly, as it did just about everyone, apparently. In that hour when the Egyptians died in the Red Sea, the ministers wished to sing the song of praise before the Holy One, but he rebuked them, saying, "My handiwork is drowning in the sea. Would you utter a song before me in honor of that?" The Sanhedrin, Shipwreckers. Oakes felt his heart pumping too fast. Perspiration drenched his green single suit. His feet hurt. Still, he staggered away from the redoubt.
Legata, how could you?
When he could move no farther, he sank to the sand, venturing his first look back. They were not pursuing.
They might have killed me.
Black char fringed the distant hole in the web where the mob had burned a passage to eject him. He stared at the hole. His chest pained him with each breath. Slowly he grew conscious of sounds other than his own gasping. The ground under his hand was trembling with some distant thunder.
Waves.
Oakes looked toward the sea. The tide was higher than he had ever seen it. A white line marked the entire sea horizon. Gigantic waves crashed against the headland where they had built the shuttle facility. Even as he watched, a great wedge of headland slid into the waves, opening a jagged gap in the shuttle hangar. He staggered to his feet, stared. Black objects moved in the white foam of the crashing sea. Rocks! There were rocks larger than a man in that surf. Even as he watched, the garden, his precious garden, sloughed away. Mewling cries like near-forgotten seabirds insinuated themselves across the spume. He looked up and turned around once, completely. Hylighters? Gone. Not one orange bag danced in the sky or hovered above the cliffs. The cries continued. Oakes looked toward the cliffs where Thomas had begun the attack. Bodies. The battleground lay there with pieces of people twitching in the harsh glare of the suns. Figures moved among the wounded, lifting some on litters and carrying them toward the cliffs. Once more, Oakes stared back at the redoubt. Certain death lay there. He turned toward the battleground and for the first time saw the demons. A shudder convulsed him. The demons were a silent mob sitting in a wide arc beyond the battleground. A single human in a white garment stood in their midst. Oakes recognized the poet, Kerro. Those cries! It was the wounded and the dying. Oakes staggered toward Peniel. What did it matter?
Send your demons against me, poet.
Here was the fringe of the battleground. Mutilated bodies. Oakes stepped on a dismembered hand. It cupped his boot in reflex, and he leaped away from it. He wanted to run back to the redoubt, back to Legata. His body refused. He could only shuffle on toward Peniel, who stood tall amidst the demons.
Why do they just sit there?
Oakes stopped only a few meters from Peniel.
You.
Oakes was surprised by the flat sound of his own voice. Yes. The poet's voice came clearly through the pellet in Oakes' neck, and there was no movement of Peniel's mouth. You're finished, Oakes.
You're the one who wrecked things for me. You're the reason Lewis and I couldn't.
Nothing is wrecked, Oakes. Life here has just begun. Peniel's lips did not move, yet that voice rang through the neck pellet.
You're not speaking, but I can hear you.
That is Avata's gift to us.
Avata?
The hylighters and the kelp, they are one. Avata.
So this planet's really beaten us.
Not the planet, nor Legata.
The ship, then. It's hounded me down at last.
Not ship.
Lewis, he did this. He and Legata.
Oakes felt his tears begin.
Lewis and Legata.
He was unable to meet Peniel's steady gaze.
Lewis and Legata.
A flatwing moved away from the poet, crawled onto the toe of Oakes' boot, rested its bristling head there. Oakes stared down at it in horror, unable to command his own muscles. Frustration forced words from him.
Tell me who did this!
You know who did it! An anguished cry was wrenched from Oakes' throat.
No!
You did it, Oakes. You and Thomas.
I didn't!
Peniel merely stared at him.
Tell your demons to kill me, then!
Oakes hurled the words at Peniel. They are not my demons.
Why don't they attack?
Because I show them a world which some would call illusion. No creature attacks what it sees, only what it thinks it sees. Oakes stared at Peniel in horror.
Illusion? This poet could fill my mind with illusion? The ship taught you how to do that.
Avata taught me. A feeling of hysteria crept into Oakes.
And your Avata's done for, all gone.
Not before teaching us the universe of alternate realities, and Avata lives in us yet. Oakes stared down at the deadly flatwing on his boot.
What does it see? What does it see?
He pointed a shaking finger at the creature. Something of its own life. A crash shook the ground all around them, and the flatwing crept off his boot to squat squarely on the sand. Oakes looked toward the source of the sound, saw that another cove-side section of the redoubt had slipped away into the surf. The white line of the horizon had moved right up to the land. Thunderous waves. The cove amplified the waves, condensing them and sending them high against the stone. Oakes stared in dumb horror as another section of the redoubt ripped away and fell from view.
I don't care what you say,
Oakes muttered.
The planet's beaten us.
If that's what you want.
What I want!
Oakes rounded on him in a rage, broke off at the approach of two E-clones carrying a wounded man on a litter. Hallie Eckel, her nose ring glittering in the brilliant light, walked alongside. Her pry box was hooked to the patient. Oakes looked down at the litter and recognized the man there, Rajah Thomas. The litter carriers stared questioningly at Oakes as they lowered Thomas to the sand.
How bad?
Oakes directed the question at Hallie. Peniel answered. He is dying. A chest wound and a flash burn. A chuckle forced its way from Oakes. He gulped it back.
So he won't survive me. At last, no CP for the damned ship.
Hallie knelt beside Thomas and looked up at Peniel. He won't survive being carried to the shelter. He wanted me to bring him to you. I know. Peniel stared down at the dying man. Awareness of Thomas lay there in Peniel's mind, linked to Vata, to Waela, to most of the E-clones whose genetic mix traced itself back to the Avata. All of it was there, the complete pattern. How profound of Ship to take the Rajah flattery of Ship's own origins and make a personal nemesis out of the man. Thomas moved his lips, a whisper only, but even Oakes heard him. I studied the question so long. I hid the problem.
What's he talking about?
Oakes demanded. He's talking to Ship. Peniel said, and this time his lips moved. His voice was the remembered voice of the poet, full of pouncing awareness. A series of gasps racked the dying man. Then,
I played the game so long. Peniel knows. It's the rock. The child. Yes, I know. The child.
Oakes snorted.
He just thinks he's talking to the ship.
You still refuse to live up to the best of your own humanity, Peniel said, looking at Oakes.
What? What do you mean?
That's all that ship ever asked of us, Peniel said. That's all warship was meant to be. Find our own humanity and live up to it.
Words! Just words!
Oakes felt that he was being crowded into a corner. Everything here was illusion. Then throw out the words and ask yourself what you're doing here, Peniel said.
I'm just trying to survive. What else is there to do?
But you've never really been alive.
I've...
Oakes fell silent as Peniel lifted an arm. One by one, the demons moved off at an angle away from the cliffside shelter. The first of them were at the cliff and moving up toward the high plains before Peniel spoke. I released them as Avata released them. Still they do what they do. Oakes looked at the departing demons.
What will they do?
When they are hungry, they will eat. It was too much for Oakes.
What do you want of me?
You're a doctor, Peniel said. There are wounded. Oakes pointed at Thomas.
You'd have me save him?
Only Ship or all of us together can save him, Peniel said.
Ship?
Or all of us together. It's the same thing.
Lies! You're lying!
The idea of saving has many meanings, Peniel said. There's comfort in the intelligence and potential immortality of our own kind. Oakes backed one step away from Peniel.
Lying words! This planet's going to kill us all!
What are your senses for, if not to be believed? Peniel asked. He gestured around him, met Halley's rapt gaze. We survive. We repair this planet. Avata, who kept this place in balance, is gone. But Vata is their daughter as much as mine.
Vata?
Oakes spat the word.
What's this new nonsense?
Waela's child has been born. She is called Vata. She carries the true seed of Avata placed there at her conception.
Another monster.
Oakes shook his head. Not at all. A beautiful child, as human in her form as her mother. Here, I will show you. Images began to play in Oakes' awareness, howling through his mind on the carrier wave of the pellet in his neck. He wanted to tear the thing from his flesh. Oakes staggered backward, thrusting at Peniel with one hand while the other hand clutched at the embedded pellet.
No! No! No!
The images would not stop. Oakes fell backward to the sand, and, as he fell, he heard the voice of Ship. He knew it was Ship. There was no escaping that presence. There was no escaping that presence as it expanded within him, not needing the pellet, not needing any device.
You see, boss, you never needed a covenant of inflexible words. All you ever needed was self-respect, the self-worship which contains all of humankind and all the things that matter for your mutual immortality.
Pressing his hands to his head, Oakes rolled to his knees. He stared down at the sand, his eyes blurred by tears. Slowly, Ship withdrew. It was a hot knife being pulled from Oakes' brain. It left an aching void. He lowered his hands and heard the crunch of many feet on sand. Turning, he saw a long line of people, E-clones and naturals, approaching from the redoubt. Legata and Lewis led them. Beyond the refugees, Oakes saw smoke drifting on a sea wind, billowing from the wreckage of the redoubt. His precious sanctuary was being destroyed. Everything! All of Oakes' rage returned as he stumbled to his feet.
Damn you, Ship! You tricked me!
Oakes shook his fist. Oakes shook a fist at Legata.
You bitch, Legata!
Lewis and Legata stopped about 10 paces from Oakes. The refugees stopped behind them except for one tall E-clone female with fine features on a bulbous head. She stepped in front of Legata. "You do not speak to her that way!" the E-clone shouted. "We have chosen her CP. You do not speak to our CP that way."
That's crazy!
Oakes screamed it.
How can deformed monstrosities choose a CP?
The E-clone took a step toward Oakes. Another. "Whom do you call monstrosity? What if we breed and breed here, and your kind becomes the freak?" Oakes stared at her in horror. "You ain't so pretty, you know," she said. "I look at me every day, and every day I don't look so bad. But every day you get uglier and uglier. What if I don't think it's right for any more uglies to be born?" Legata stepped forward and touched the woman's arm. "Enough." As Legata spoke, a dark shadow flowed over them. They looked up to see Ship passing between Rega and the plain, far lower than Ship had ever been before. The odd protrusions and wing shapes of the Agraria were clearly visible. The shadow moved with an awesome slowness, an eternity in the passage. When the shadow touched him, Lewis began to laugh. All who heard him turned toward Lewis, and most of them were in time to see him vanish. He became a white blur which dissolved and left nothing where he had stood. "Why, Ship?" Peniel spoke it aloud, startled by the disappearance. They all heard the answer, a joyous clamor in their heads.
You needed a real devil, Jesus Lewis, the other half of me. The real devil always goes with me. Thomas remained his own devil, a special kind of demon, a goad. And now he knows. Humans, you have won your reprieve. You know how to worship.
In that instant, they all saw Ship's intentions toward Thomas, the issue hanging on a fragile balance. Thomas raised himself on one elbow, resisting Hallie's attempts to prevent it. "No, Ship," he muttered. "Not back to Hybe. I'm home." Legata intruded. "Let him go, Ship."
If you can save him, he is yours.
Ship's challenge rang through them. Peniel held fast to the awareness of Thomas and sent the call to Vata back in the medical shelter at the cliffs. "Vata, help us!" The old presence of Avata crept into his mind, attenuated but with nothing omitted. Vata was all of what had been, and more. Peniel felt his daughter as the repository of those long eons when Avata had lived and learned, but welded now to everything human. She reached beyond the plane into the crew remaining aboard ship, even into the dormant ones of Hybe, giving them new worship and weaving them into a single organism. They came together an awareness at a time, even Oakes. And when they were united, they moved thread-like into the flesh of Thomas, closing his wounds, repairing cells. It was done, and they left Thomas asleep on the litter. It was done. I just said that. Peniel took a trembling breath and stared around him at the people on the plain. In the healing of Thomas, all of the wounded had been restored. There were bodies of the dead, but not a single maimed among the living. All stood silent under the shadow presence which slid across the plain.
Legata.
It was Ship again. Still shaken by the experience of the sharing, she spoke aloud in a trembling voice. "Yes, Ship?"
You have taken my best friend, Legata. Oakes is mine now, a fair exchange. Where I go, I will need him more than you.
She looked up at the Rega-haloed outline. "You're leaving?"
I travel the Ox Gate, Legata. The Ox Gate, my childhood and my eternity.
She thought about the Ox Gate, the scrambled repository in which she had found the truth about Oak's origins, the near mystical computer where hidden things emerged. As she thought this, she felt her own consciousness become one with Ship's records. And because they were all linked through Vata, all on the plane shared this. Ship's words and images rode over this flooding awareness.
Infinite imagination has its infinite horrors, too. Poets turn their nightmares to words. With gods, dreams take on substance and lives of their own. Such things cannot be scratched out. The ox gate, my morality factor. My psyche moves both ways. If it moves in symbols, it moves through the ox. Some of my symbols walk and breathe, as it was with Jesus Lewis. Others sing in the words of poets.
Oakes fell to his knees, pleading.
Don't take me, Ship. I don't want to go.
But I need you, Morgan Oakes. I no longer have Thomas, my personal demon, and I need you.
Ship's shadow began to pass beyond the people on the plain. As light touched Oakes, he vanished, a white blur, then an empty place on the sand. Legata stood there, looking at where Oakes had knelt, and she could not keep the tears from coursing down her cheeks. Hallie stood up beside the litter where her patient slept. She felt emptied and angry, robbed of her role. She stared up at the passing immensity of Ship. "Is this what I was supposed to let them know?" she demanded.
Show them, Echo.
Still angry, she played the images of the crucifixion. Then, "Ship, is that how it was with Yeshua? Was he just another filament from one of your dreams?"
Does it matter, Echo? Is the lesson diminished because the history that moves you is fiction? The incident which you just shared is too important to be debated on the level of fact or fancy. Yeshua lived. He was an ultimate essence of goodness. How could you learn such an essence without experiencing its opposite?
The shadow was gone from them, flowing away over the cliffs, carrying off the bits of humanity remaining up there, the Natali, the hive attendants, the hydroponics workers. "Ship is leaving us," Legata said. She crossed to Peniel's side. In the midst of her words, she felt the blaze of awareness which Ship had shared with them. Ship records, all of the pasts carried into the smallest cell on the plane. "We've been weaned," Peniel said. "We have to go it alone now." Hallie joined them. "No more ship tits." "But alone has lost all of its old meanings," Peniel said. "Is this what the expansion of the universe is all about?" Legata asked. "The fleeing of the gods from their own handiwork?" "Gods ask other questions," Peniel said. He looked down at Hallie. "You were midwife to us all when you brought us Vata and the Hill of Skulls." "Vata brought herself," Hallie said. She put a hand in Peniel's. "Some things don't need a midwife." "Or a CP," Legata said. She grinned. "But it's a role we all know now." She shook her head. "I have only one question. What will Ship do with those people up there?" She pointed upward at the vanishing ship. They all heard it then, Ship's presence filling the people on the plain, then fading, but never to be forgotten.
Surprise me, holy void.
And that was The Jesus Incident by Bill Ransom and Frank Herbert.
How wild was that?
It is so good. I love that. I love that. It's just like, whoa, what's going on? But yeah, it's a book that tackles godhood, really, in a lot of ways, and our essential humanity. Um, so what's that line here? That's all ship ever asked of us, Peniel said. That's all warship was ever meant to be. Find our own humanity and live up to it. Be the best we can be the best people we can be. Be decent to each other even. So, yeah, I like the message there. That certainly helps. I like the execution as well. It's very bewildering. Like if you haven't read Destination Void, you're going to feel like something's missing, but I think you can get away with it without it, um, if need be. Most of the relevant details are filled in, which just makes it even more immense and terrifying and baffling and bedazzling, and almost cloying in how much is there. Um, but it's great. I think of the Pandora sequence, the three books co-authored by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. I think this one stands on its own the best. Um, but the other two, I mean, Lazarus Effect also stands on its own well, and it probably needs even less background. There's recurring themes, I guess, but it is a very different book. That one actually probably is the one that stands on its own best. You can probably, I mean, hell, I hadn't actually read this yet by the time I had first run into the Lazarus Effect. I read that before I read this, and by the time I got around to this, I had forgotten most of that book anyway. So the stuff that carries over between, I kind of forgot. The third book is kind of like this one in that it's a ton of stuff all put together. Um, but I kind of I just love the conceit of there is an omnipotent, effectively omniscient spacecraft that we created that has gone through a zillion time loops and realities and is like, I'm putting humanity to the test. And I'm going to find out if they can pass it, if they can learn a lesson, if they can learn about themselves and learn to be more human. Um, Humanity learning to be human, sort of thing. And all it kind of wants to do is just exist, chill in the universe. What's the point of consciousness? Well, if you're an omnipotent conscious being, it's to experience things, experience new things. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's the point. Um, Uh, I do like how the dark flip side of the coin of this book is, in many ways, and Destination Void really, is Blind Sight by Peter Watts. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it's kind of wild how similar they wind up being in terms of asking questions about consciousness. What's the point of being conscious? Uh, and of course, Blind Sight comes to the conclusion it's like, well, it might not actually be all that relevant at all. It is what makes us us, but it's not a necessary thing necessarily. The universe could exist without it and still have interacting elements, creatures that interact with their environment. Um, One can argue that's part of the message of that book if there's a message to be had. Um, so this one's great. I like the Lazarus Effect as well. It feels it's less highfalutin, maybe. It's a bit more, I'd say, down to earth, but earth doesn't factor in. um, the stakes aren't quite so high, or don't seem to have like that ticking clock, but there is a ticking clock, and you'll learn about that when we get there. Um, it's not quite the same. The third book, The Ascension Factor, like that is a wild ride. Like that book is like zero. It goes from 0 to 60 like in the first chapter and just keeps going. And it's like you're gonna keep up. It's fine. You're gonna keep up, but you're gonna have to work at it. It's like it doesn't dumb anything down. It's just like we are ripping across this narrative. We are just pelting. We have engaged rocket thrusters. It is relentless. It is just crazy how quickly that book goes down. It's just like you're reading, you're like, my God, a lot just happened. My God, a lot keeps happening. What is going on? It's a good time. Familiar faces abound in that one. I quite like it. Um, this is probably my favorite of the lot. Maybe, maybe. I'm not sure. I change my opinion on that every time I think about it. Anyway, that really just does it right there. That kind of nails it. That's the book. Um, Next Friday, I don't think I've got anything special going on next Friday. Next Friday, we will start The Dark Forest by Shijin Liu, the second book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy um, by Same. So that'll be exciting. This weekend or immediately after my stream on Monday, I might actually do it then. I will get all the playlists taken care of and reorganized or organized up. Next week's going to be kind of chaotic for me, so some things might fall apart, but we will find out. Friday actually could be problematic, so we'll find out. Fortunately, it's between books, so if something does go awry, I will be able to. It won't feel like too big a break. Anyway, that will do it for me. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. There were a bunch of you live tuning in. If you're tuning in after the fact, hi, I do these live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday starting at around 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, US East Coast time, or UTC minus 5, 6, something like that. Yeah, so if you want to tune in live, you can. You don't have to. Don't feel like that's a commitment because that's a bizarre time to have to do that. That's like your lunch break at work, is what it is. It's the time that I happen to have free, but I can definitely understand that most people can't. So I'm perfectly content with people watching them after the fact. No commitment on time frame for that for anybody. Oh, right. I had a couple extra covers here. I found this one as I was looking for the map. So there's a map at the beginning of my edition of the book, which is the what edition? Who did this one? Where are you? Berkeley Books edition, which is, let me real quick open up my folder here to find the image. I think it's, no, it's not that one. It's not that one. It's not that one. It's not that one. It's that one. That's this one. No, it's the next one. Okay. This edition. Oh no. The first time I was reading this, I was like, "Oh my God, what is going on? They're really doing what they're doing here." It is a zany book. The ending is wrapped up fairly quickly and abruptly, which might be it's a bit of a pacing concern. Here we go, book covers, and it is. So my edition of the book is this one here. And in this copy of the book, there is a map, 2 pages, 2 small pages, a map of either side of Pandora, which is shaped like an egg, which is why it's called an egg, or called the egg occasionally. And on it, there is detailed an island chain, a body, a land mass that is a small island chain. It looks it's like 5 islands, small dots. There's a landmass, the one I believe that is called Black Dragon. And on this map, it shows colony locations, colony attempt locations, with a number next to them. And that number signifies losses in hundreds. So one of them, the Jacob Miller colony, lost 600 people. The Edmund Kingston colony lost 5,200 people. The Gwen Curry colony lost 16,600 people. Morgan Oaks lost 3,200 people, apparently. That's at the colony, I believe. No, that's not at colony. It gets worse. And then someone named Hildegard Sven, that's the one at the Redoubt. Is the one that lost 3,200 people. And then Hildegard Svensson lost 12,500 people. And then on the other continent, and I don't remember the name of that one off the top of my head, we had a loss of like 100 people, 900 people, about 1,000 people again, 500 people, and then 1,500, 10,000 people, 11,000 people died at Colony, which is the colony that we got to know and love. That got died in riots. We don't know how many of those people got saved by highlighters. We can assume not many. So there's maps there. I could have taken pictures, I guess, in hindsight, but I didn't. I could not, for the life of me, find a digital copy of this book that had these maps in there. So if you find a copy of the Jesus Incident that has this cover, that is probably the one I had, and that should have the maps. I don't know what other ones do. So, other covers that were interesting here. Let me. Yes, which one is this? BB something. BB something. Yeah, here we go. Here's I believe it's a French cover. L'incident Jesus. This one was pretty neat. I'm just putting this in my copy is kind of falling apart, so I have a plastic sheath I'm putting it in. And then one last one here. I think I did that one. Where are you? Here we go. So there's actually expanded version of cover art of, which is this, the 86 something. Zoop. The expanded cover art of this one, which got my account dinged on Twitch, actually has a second half, as it turns out, which is this one here. One with what we can assume are those small flying animals, scavengers of some kind, and then nothing. So good times. I think that's about it. That's about all I got. I think I showed off this one at some point. Anyway, so yeah, that's the Jesus Incident. I gotta run. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Just live to your human potential. Be a human being to each other. Alrighty, see you all later. Have a great day. Until next time.